Well, we sort of spent the morning on how to get to this point so we could improve or expand our traditional villages or build new ones in septic. And now we, having seen this patterns, we are getting into other ways of facilitating it or making it possible. And the next one has to do with financing it. And presenting that is Jim Tischler.
Good afternoon. My name's Jim Tischler. Thank you, Jay, for the introduction. A technical point, I'm the development director for the State Land Bank. There is a politically appointed executive director, nice lady, Emily Dorr is her name, and I work for her. I run the development operations for the State Land Bank, and when the state of Michigan has development or redevelopment projects on its properties or other properties across the state, I am the chief coordinator of pulling talent from multiple state agencies to put development and design teams together to do those projects, okay? So if you know of or have like a unused old prison in your neck of the woods or an unused state facility, chances are somehow if it gets to be repurposed redevelopment, me or my team will be behind that initiative. We've been active in Northwest Michigan up in Traverse City area at the Pugsley site. Well, it's called GTED now, it used to be the former Camp Pugsley facility, and a few other places up this way, and I love coming out into the field. Our agency is not very large, there's 10 of us, and we like to pride ourselves as being one of the doing agencies of the government. We get things done, and I know a number of you from my time past in other employment in other venues in CNU, so I'm glad to be here today. I want to talk to you about this concept of TIF for neighborhood development. That's what I'm going to get into. But I want to actually bridge going back to some really good material that the Gordy Fraser folks put up in their presentation before lunch. In all that good information, you saw a couple of slides that were good. First is, what are your sources that you can use to finance infrastructure for things like community septic systems or others? And you saw those lists, right? You saw federal funds, USDA, you saw state of Michigan, and then you saw bond financing. Now, I'm going to be polite because they're really good people. If you get lucky, you might get that money as grant, okay? Maybe 10% of the time. Most of the time, you're going to be looking at getting loans from those entities to finance a community septic system or any other sort of infrastructure. So what I'm going to present now is kind of the three dimensions of what I'll call the conundrum for you as a small village or a small community in mid and northern lower Michigan and even more significantly up in the Upper Peninsula that we see all the time. You'd like to see growth. You have good developers wanting to do development or have done development in your community or want to do. But how does that infrastructure get financed? And more than that, not just who pays for it, but how is it paid for? Okay? So if you have opportunity to get funds from the government, it's coming mostly as loan to you, which means there has to be a way to pay for that to be done. And then what comes next is who is going to pay that? Now to my developers in this audience, I know who you are. I'm going to say one way a municipality does is to say, you developer, you invest in that infrastructure and those other amenities to your site in addition to your residential or commercial development, and you're going to capitalize the cost of the infrastructure by, for lack of a better phrase, surcharging, if I will allow me. So if somebody wants to buy the lot in new neighborhood or another development, they're actually buying the house or the commercial building. We'll say it's a house right now. And they're also buying the proportional capitalized infrastructure. And that's fine, it's a way to do it. But you know what's happening over time? No offense, developers, but what's happening over time is that because of the cost of construction and the cost of labor and the cost of materials, we know now through the research that if you're at an area-wide median income of at about 105%, meaning if the area median income is at 100% and you are up to 5% above that, 105%, you're likely unable to afford to pay or rent new housing. How many of you think that's happening in this market? If you are, raise your hand, please. Raise them real high. Okay, I'm a short guy. Okay. Right? If you believe that incomes at average or up to 5% above average cannot afford housing in your community, raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. So the point I'm going to drive at here is now if the municipality surcharges the developer, okay, then the developer has to pass that cost on to the purchasers. And what's happening over time is prices going up and up and up and up, and our income's going up and up and up to match prices? No. That's been a 30-year trend. And that's dimension 2 of the conundrum. You only get loans, and if you push it on to the developers, then you're just going to push up the cost of housing. As good as they are, and as much as you want to have community septic system, which is a really great idea, okay, there's still a cost attached to it. So that leads the third area, which I heard today too, which is common out there too, which is, well, you can do special assessment. Yes, you can. Who's paying that special assessment? It's the purchaser household on that lot or in that unit that's paying that assessment. And that, yes, can be done, but that's also adding to the cost of the purchase of the household. So yes, but it's also there as well. And the third financing aspect, which is used and is valuable, is bonding, municipal bonding. Yes, it's good. What does that require? That would require the Village of Empire, or municipality, to go put the full faith and credit of the municipality on the line when they go out to the bond market or to borrow. All right? Yes, but there are some major implications to that. Okay? I'm going to introduce a fourth topic to you today, and that's tax increment financing. How many of you have heard of tax increment financing? Okay. Keep your hands high, because I want to see this now. If you've heard that tax increment financing is, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. This is a test. If you've heard that tax increment financing is a bad thing, lower your hand. Okay. I figure that. You can put your hands on that now. About half of you have heard, or maybe you believe, that tax increment financing ain't such a good thing. So I want to go into that today in a few slides and explain what it is all about, and that it can be used to develop infrastructure at neighborhood scale, which is something when we go out and talk to communities, I often get responses, I never heard of that, Jim. What are you talking about? That's why Jay asked me to come and talk to you today. Another alternative that you can actually leverage with one or more sources to reduce those other sources' need to finance, which then actually is a relief for developers potentially in part, and a relief for residents and communities in part as well. So let's start with a picture to give you an indication of what the heck am I talking about with tax increment financing. All right, this is as simple a graphic as I've ever been able to find, all right, to explain, because it is a little bit complex if you understand it. But the nutshell is this. If you look at value on that y-axis on the left, where the dollar sign is, and you look at time over on the bottom of this, okay, I'm going to walk over to the screen. A property which has a value today of $100, okay, which needs benefit, whether it's infrastructure or if you're familiar with cleanup brownfield sites, it might need to be cleaned up, or it might need to have other amenity benefit to support it or the community. That in order to finance that activity, that infrastructure, that cleanup and such, there's a need for a source of revenue. So if the government decides they're going to adopt a plan which says, over time, that $100 value is going to stay in place and continue to pay the city, village, township, whoever it's going to be and such, but that any new value predicated on the construction of a house or 100 houses or whatever is going to be constructed on that property, that increment in value, that yellow triangle, that as it grows in time is going to be captured. It's going to be used. And it's going to be used to actually pay the cost of that infrastructure line that was necessary to build that house or to clean up that property or to do other activities that the plan says are appropriate for the site or the neighborhood or the community. And then at the end of its payment of that cost, and let's just assume, just for discussion purposes, that the cost of that infrastructure was $900, and taxes, new taxes were $100 a year, so after 9 years, I'm being really simple here with you today. After 9 years, that cost is paid off. What happens then is that the property, the capture period is done, and that property, which is new or rehabilitated with a house or with a commercial building or cleaned up site, whatever it is, it's going to go back to normal, which is it pays more revenue, new revenue to all of the taxing jurisdictions, the city, the county, the schools, and whoever it is going to be. That is what tax increment financing is all about. Questions? Yes.
Is this available?
Excuse me?
Is this going to be available for us?
We'll make it available for you.
Thank you.
Well, it's on this screen here, or this computer, so you guys will get this. Yes. Yeah, Mark?
Don't they quite often add to the length of time?
Well, sure. And that's where some of the complications start to strive. That's why I'm trying to point out to you, this is basic and it's simple, but there are various permutations and approaches and frankly some issues out there with how some communities use tax and refinancing. And that, in my opinion, directly and honestly, is where the bad stuff starts to happen with tax and refinancing, is that it's not used for its real purpose, which is to offset or to cover extraordinary costs. Whether it's, I need infrastructure, or I need to clean up a brownfield site, or something similar to that. It's all the other fluff that's often in these projects, not necessarily in Michigan, okay? I'm going to flip the slide here, because I'm getting in now to some of these issues and benefits, all right? But in other states, that's where some of the larger issues, controversies have risen, which have spilled over into the general population consideration here in Michigan, which is about TIF, or tax and refinancing. On the positive side, I just explained to you, it's going to generate new revenue. It's going to pay for those extraordinary costs. And it has some relative autonomy. The state is never going to require the Village of Empire to do this or not to do this. The Village of Empire, or Empire Township, yeah, or Leelanau County, or whoever, or government entity, if they have the authority and power, can do this, okay? So that's a good thing. But now going back to addressing the controversies head on. Abuse in tax and refinancing is out there. I have friends in Illinois. It's a great state. But right now they're on the clock with a lot of negative controversy about how their state TIF program is run. Because it goes past the concept of extraordinary cost and frankly into some areas that people really, it makes news, which is developers having windfall profits. Not our developers, they're good developers. But windfall profits because it's gone past extraordinary cost reimbursement and into something more. Now, I don't want to just pick on Illinois. This is other states. 49 states allow for tax increment financing, okay? And you have variations of programs and activities and services and such. But interjurisdictional conflict is one of those additional problems. What does that mean? Well, the general thinking is if I'm a school system or if I'm a local unit of government and my tax money is being captured to pay for some other activity, that means it's less money for me to provide service to my residents or to my students or to other activities, okay? And yes, it is in the short term and only on the site within which if there wasn't the assistance, there would not be a new investment, so you, city, village, or school system would never see any new revenue. You see? That is where this interjurisdictional conflict issue can get resolved, is if everybody understands what the real purpose of this is about. Bureaucracy levels and in districts, this issue of financial projection are problems as well if you don't appropriately account for it. There's a question or comment in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, you said make sure you understand that graph.
Yeah.
So,
you know what I the previous one.
before that.
Yeah.
So, the increase in value, which would translate into higher taxes, the community doesn't collect for a period of time, and the developer is able to put it into the project to lower the cost? So
Yes,
people can
but
buy it?
I'll translate that for you.
Yeah.
That the cost of the extraordinary cost to cover the activity that is needed to happen in order for the project to occur.
So the developer can afford to do it?
Correct.
Okay.
And then when that cost is covered, the plan ends. And the project, the infrastructure is built, or the site's cleaned up. The project is already built, and now it's paying taxes to everybody at a higher level. So everybody benefits in the end when the plan ends.
If you get to the end.
When you get to the end. And I'll explain why it's a when instead of an if, okay? All right, because that's another issue. That's one of the issues out there with TIF, which is, be direct, with a lot of district TIFs. When I say district TIFs, how many of you are familiar with the Downtown Development Authority? How many of you is there one in your community, a Downtown Development Authority? Okay. All right, what about a corridor authority? What about a local LDFA, Local Development Finance Authority? They're good people, okay? And they're doing good work. However, the concept of a district and a TIF has some real issues because of a perception that it goes on forever. It's 30 years, plus another 30 years, plus another 30 years. And that is one of the negatives that are out there, which in my honest and personal opinion has to get resolved, and I believe it will in time, meaning that that will be truncated out. That will shift from a district-based TIF more to a project or parcel-based TIF in time. It's just got, the system's going to have to work itself out.
So
Yes.
So this wouldn't be an individual, this would be like, could it be a subdivision? Could it be a?
Yes. That's what I'm going to hold that thought for about 3 slides, and you'll be seeing it. Exactly right. Yep. That's the purpose. Yep.
What's the difference between a TIF and a pilot then?
Well, a TIF is a capture of the ad valorem property tax. When you and I pay a tax bill, then we're going to pay the city. It's broken down, right? You get the village, you get the village, you got Leelanau County, you have the state education tax and such. That's ad valorem taxes. And so a TIF, tax increment financing, is a capture of ad valorem taxes to use. A pilot, which is an acronym for payment in lieu of taxes, okay, is a financing mechanism usually reserved for tax credit housing projects, if you're familiar with the low-income housing tax credit program, and projects that get financed by those entities. In Michigan, it's the State Housing Development Authority, which is our housing finance agency. So in projects which have units or projects wholly financed by MISHDA or with use of low-income housing tax credits, a requirement in those projects is that the developers usually require it because they have to present a good pro forma, is to ask the municipality on that site, whatever that project is with 30 residential units, instead of doing ad valorem tax, to convert and allow for a percentage of the rents on that project to be paid, which is a payment in lieu of taxes. That's what pilot is about. So that's the difference between the two. Other questions or comments? Keep them coming. I love to engage audiences on this stuff because as you ask questions, you're learning. You probably are used to, this is a segue back to what I was talking about with district TIFs. You are probably used to your Downtown Development Authority, that's a district TIF, or your Corridor Authority, that's a district TIF, or other district TIFs, and that things like this happen. I think that's Downtown TC, isn't it? Okay. All right. So infrastructure or streetscapes or parking decks or other activities, you are probably familiar with those, aren't you? Right? Okay. But what if I told you that instead of being a corridor like that, it could actually be a neighborhood, like new neighborhood, or any neighborhood. And it could be an existing neighborhood, if you needed rehabilitation of infrastructure, or it could be something totally new, next phase, next edition, whatever it could be. Well, here's 2 tools. They exist under law in Michigan. They have been under law for the last 15 years, and not a lot of people using them. So here we go. I'm going to talk to you about what is in Act 57, Part 8. I'll explain that shortly, what that means. All right, which is neighborhood improvement authorities. You have the ability, a local unit of government, a city or village, under Michigan law, to establish a district, if you wanted to, of a neighborhood, and you could do those types of public improvements. And I'll talk more detail that in a minute. Or something that has been more recent, which kind of we pioneered a few years back with my compadres at the State Land Bank, was that, and you have a land bank here in Leelanau County, right? You know Trudy Gala and John Gallagher is your treasurer. They're good people doing good work, okay? And down your way, it's Heidi and her folks down at Grand Traverse Land Bank, okay? So this interesting connection of what's known as the Brownfield Redevelopment Finance Act, Act 381, with land banks was discovered about 2 or 3 years ago and has the ability actually to get at project level TIF to support infrastructure and even housing development. So I'll get briefly into that in a few minutes, but here's what's key. What do you need to get into to be able to do these types of projects? You got to have a property that's eligible or targeted, like a neighborhood or like a property. You got to have something that's eligible. Infrastructure is an eligible activity. A community system, a septic system, there we go, is an infrastructure activity by definition. It's an eligible activity, okay? Next is there needs to be a development project or a plan, meaning, as I explained in my simple exercise, an example, that the capture of taxes to pay for costs come from new development, but it comes from the ad valorem tax capture, not from leveraging a special assessment or another fee to the owners. It comes from the owners paying taxes on, less like you would, so you would pay your tax bill, you wouldn't notice any difference. But that increase in value and the tax paid on increase in value would be captured by the plan and then used to pay debt service on the borrowing to pay that cost. All right? I'll explain how that comes together shortly. So, but it requires a development plan, meaning a developer that's in front of you, village or municipality, saying, I want to do this project and I have these costs need to get covered. And I want to enter an agreement with you if you do a plan to capture taxes. And there are performance standards, meaning you're not going to have to pay anything unless I, developer, actually build the thing and actually pays taxes. Okay, so that's important. And the work plan, which is similar to what you saw earlier from our friends at Gordy Fraser, which is here's the detail that needs to be done to do that community septic system. That's the plan of work, the scope of work. All right, and the TIF plan is actually the finance plan that I've been referencing. So if you have those 5 ingredients, or you understand how those 5 ingredients come together, you could do this in your local community. Oh, I thought there was a question or comment. Okay, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, all these acts under state law, the downtown and the corridor and the neighborhood and the local development and such, they were all brought together because they were all across the statute books. They're all brought together into this consolidated act, Act 57. It's actually called the Recodified Tax Increment Financing Act. Okay, and the 8th part of that, because there were 8 acts that came together, is neighborhood improvement authorities. Okay, what does it do? It allows a city or village to do what I just talked about. You can take that neighborhood existing, if you want to do infrastructure rehabilitation, or streetscaping, or other amenity benefits, or developer A, Chris Fry comes to town and says, I want to do a project in my community, in my community, and I have these infrastructure needs. Then you can get together and you actually arrange for that to make a more affordable sale project to your own market. Okay, if you set up a district, a development area, and then you go through the process. Now, I am not giving you the process today, okay? You have to ask me to come back to tell you about that. Wink, wink. But what I'm telling you here today is that, and you right there, that second bullet, what can an authority do? Well, improve land, construct, reconstruct, rehab, restore, yada, blah, blah, blah. Any public facility is above grade, at grade, below grade. There's a definition of statute for that. Okay, a building, meaning you could actually finance residential buildings in part with private developers if you wanted to, missing middle projects and the like. And any necessary desirable appurtenances within the development area for a public-private use. Okay, that's pretty wide-ranging, isn't it?
So are you assuming the taxes will increase with the improvement?
I'm not assuming. I know that's what's going to happen.
Okay.
Absolutely, because if that plan takes 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, whatever that cost is, at the end of that period of time, this plan is going to end, and that value is going to be on the ground, or under the ground, or at grade in that neighborhood, and then it's going to be paying full taxes to all the taxing jurisdictions. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So, the words public facility, I mean, for there to be ad valorem tax base,
Yep.
it's gotta be privately owned that pays property taxes. If it's a publicly owned building that a TIF finances, the public, the government
So
doesn't
what
pay taxes
So
to
to
itself.
differentiate for you, Chris, right, good point. Differentiate is that the activity that gets financed is a public facility, okay? But the value which is used and captured to pay for that is private investment on the property or adjacent property that actually is required for that facility.
But who's paying the taxes later?
The
It's owned
owners
by the
that,
village.
the owners of the units that come and purchase in your new development.
Oh, so it's not constructing a fire hall?
Well, hang on a second. Let's go to I'll come back to that in just a second.
Okay.
Let's, in the development of 100 homes that you're proposing, okay? Which has infrastructure need of X dollars, okay? You can see that pretty quickly, right? It's 100 units, they're gonna pay, their houses are $100,000, don't laugh too hard. They're $100,000 in value, the tax is gonna be $2,000 a year. Over 100 houses, you got, a couple $100,000 a year, it's going, you get such. Yes, now, adjacent to this neighborhood or within the development area, the village needs a new fire hall. Okay? Right? I'll wax with numbers. That building is $2 million. Maybe, probably not, but let's play with me here. $2 million. If it's in the development area, okay, then the plan could be designed to say, well, we're going to reimburse the infrastructure costs, but there's enough capacity if the plan goes out for 17 years to capture additional revenue and use that, guess what, to pay the cost of the fire hall.
Got it. So there's a private, public component.
Either or both. Correct. Yep. Yes, sir.
What pays the bill is everybody within the district, is that
Correct.
correct?
Yeah, correct.
So you're in the district and you've got an old house and all the fancy stuff is happening all around you,
Yep.
and your house triples in value, but all that value doesn't go to the school, it goes to pay off all this other stuff that everybody else got.
Is that a question or a statement?
That's a scenario statement.
Okay. So here's my response to that statement. First of all, let's talk about you own an old house
Right.
first. And you have rehabilitation needs in that house. Okay? You're the homeowner. If the municipality allowed in this scenario, rehabilitation is an eligible activity. The municipality could say, if you want to do if you had significant rehabilitation costs, you might be able to actually get reimbursed in part for that rehabilitation out of your future taxes to pay. So there's a benefit to you if you're an existing homeowner, number one. But now let's talk about the schools. Actually, it's one of my last slides, because that's one of the issues that's out there with TIF. If we do this, then there's no new money coming into our schools or into our municipal coffers. And my answer to that is, right now, it's to say yes with a massive contingency. Yes, you don't see new revenue for a period of time. Okay, let's assume this didn't happen. And what new revenue would you see over a period of time? That's the point, which is that this allows municipalities and municipalities to actually reinvest, redevelop to increase value in taxes, which in time benefits everybody, including the schools and including municipalities. And that's a very significant policy understanding that, I'll be direct, I've said this a couple times, I'll say it again. In a lot of communities, that's not understood, because they simply think TIF takes money away. But the same communities are scrambling for new revenue to pay for their services. Well, if nobody's coming in the door tomorrow, why? Because it's too expensive to build new construction for people to buy in your community, okay? As good as you're going to build a house, okay, who's your market? All right, that's the key point. And if that allows for an increase in value, which after a period of time brings in more taxes to everybody, this is the evaluation question you have to answer out there in the field. Is that worth it for you? Okay? My advocacy, personally, is that darn it is. Okay? Why? Because this current market is not delivering a boatload of new revenue to you right now, is it? Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I think I would add that if a community was like a TIF district within a community is not the only thing paying taxes. So if the community is vastly improved, there's going to be development around that too, and all of those extra taxes will be going to the school.
It's all in how you set it up.
Yeah, so you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And in Chicago, they know very creative ways to suck the money out of it.
So, thank you for setting it up. Yeah, because I don't want to pick on them, but there's a lot of media play about what's going on with Illinois TIF in the Chicago area. I'm very
My
familiar with
office
that.
is in Chicago.
Yep. So you can probably get a lot of stories from him after we get done about what's going on over there.
And
Yes.
remember Proposition A and Headley. To use Robert's example. I'm an aged fixed income retiree that suddenly finds my old home in the middle of a TIF district. It's got lots of now activity going around me. I'm not doing anything to my property. I'm Prop A. My tax value ain't gonna go up. So I'm not gonna be hurt, okay? It's gonna stay, and it's gonna only rise by the consumer price index of the state of Michigan or 5%, whichever's less. That's Prop A. And so I'm protected, but if other stuff goes on, so for this
Based on new value, right?
for this to go on, you've got to have uncapping events associated with property or, you know, new construction.
Or new value, right, new value,
Yeah,
right.
so, you know, if the new neighborhood has capacity, which it does, thanks to Robert and Gordy Frazier and the state regulations, we got a ton of capacity over there. Village, I'm going to lay out the big picture. Village takes it over. You take the schoolhouse and you take the Zimmerman property and you call it one ginormous TIF district, and you use the TIF to pay for some of the infrastructure costs and make sure you got a public building out of it, whether a fire hall or something out of it, to make it legitimate to that law, and away you go. And it sure as heck would be a lot better than the effort of Dollar General 5 years ago,
You don't need any.
which is
public
what you're
building.
gonna get.
You don't need any public building. The assumption is you're doing all of this for general improvement. It does, I know a lot of these things, we've been hired by communities who've had accidental reality show up. They get a TIF district and something they didn't expect happens. And now, what do we do? So they call our office and we go and look at it and say, holy mackerel. And it's not that much different than bonding. I mean, it's somewhat similar. A bond is a long-term payoff of a debt, usually for infrastructure.
With one major difference, which is really important. If the village is going to bond to do infrastructure itself, then they have to put their full faith and credit on the line. You know what I mean by that? You know what I mean by full faith and credit? That means that in its resolution to say, yep, it's big, thick resolution and packet they have to approve at the village council level to authorize their bond council to go put it out in the market. They have to actually have a commitment that the full faith and credit of the village, or if it's Leland County, whoever it is going to be on the line to guarantee so that if something happens, then the bond holders are going to be paid off. Okay? And on really solid deals, that's usually not a problem. But in smaller communities, sometimes that's a little, you're a small community, so what do? TIF is different. It's not a general obligation bond that has to be floated. It would be a revenue bond, okay? And a revenue bond only needs to be able to meet the threshold of what, I'm getting a little deep in the weeds here, 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. okay? In other words, if the revenues coming in exceed the costs, everything packed in by 1.25, then generally that's good to go as a revenue bond sale and will be bought out by the market. Now I'll get out of the weeds because that's really deep. The point being is that there's a major difference, which is sometimes a really critical discussion topic at governing bodies, in front of governing bodies. Okay? Let me just cover this and move to the slide. I'll get to your questions. This is what I find surprising. Those 4 communities, to my knowledge, and to our quick look, we haven't gone deep into the research. This law has been on the books since 2004. A grand total of 4 communities have used it. Okay? There may be more, a couple more, if they just haven't reported in that they've created districts. And so that's part of the issue, is that, in our opinion, is that there's not enough knowledge out across the state that you have these tools at your disposal to use. So now you know today, okay? This slide, you already mentioned this. What's your revenue source? It's the new or rehabilitated units and the value that they bring and the taxes on the new value that they bring. That's the new, aggregated together, that's your source. That's your source to pay. So the next phase, I might not be getting this right. The next phase of new neighborhood, or phases, or other expansion of neighborhoods in Empire Village could be done. And if there's a desire to do 1 or more community septic systems, it could be done using this mechanism, okay, to finance it to go. That's my point I'm trying to make to you. But that's just one tool. I want to shift. Wait, there were 2 comments or questions out here before I shift over to the other tool.
I just wanted to comment, I'm a commissioner, and I do know that historically, our Leelanau Commission, when they hear the word bond, a whole bunch of them freak out and say, oh no way ever, we will not back anything. So that's just kind of our reality in this county. And if we can change the makeup of commissioners, it might, so everybody vote. But that's just our reality, I just needed to.
So a bond is a problem then, because a bond requires a full faith credit pledge. So I can't see that happening in the present time if that's what you're saying. A TIF is a different animal. A TIF is a revenue bond. It doesn't require full faith and credit pledge. Okay? So that may be something to consider. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask about the timeframes. How do the TIF timeframes get determined? And then the corollary would be, as an architect, I can tell you that over time we have been encouraged to build with cheaper and cheaper materials to result in crappier and crappier buildings. Over time, they lose value from that perspective. And is there a mechanism by which you encourage, if you will, or arm twist, to have a higher quality of construction?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the time frame first. And I can only speak relatively to you today in response, because we don't have a project with costs in front of us. But it scales. In other words, the time necessary is essentially a function of how much revenue is generated on an annual basis, which can be put to debt service to reimburse the finance costs of a loan, whether it's a bond or whether it's a private financing or a loan from the Eagle or whatever that source is going to be. So it's going to be relative and it's going to be calculated out. Those variables are going to calculate in, and that might show that it pays off in 9.5 years. Okay, so the TIF plan probably didn't go to 10 years. Okay, or it might take 11 years or 7 years, however that might be. So it's a relative situation. You have to have the right key variables tied to what I showed you as the ingredients up front earlier, kind of in place. And I'm being simplistic today. You want to have folks that are, of course, knowledgeable on this. You got good engineers, designers here with you. You want to have a good municipal or support from the county or the region folks, or heck, we'll come up and help support you if necessary to help put these pieces together. On the quality side, well, my answer to that is if you want, this again, generically, if you want good quality, you can ask for that. You just know that there might be more expense, which means more time in order to reimburse costs with that. But there's nothing that's prohibiting you from demanding that. Right?
Who's doing the demanding?
The local unit of government, through their governing body and their authority, because they're the ones that are actually going to finance the reimbursement of these costs for the projects. Right?
So the Leland County Land Bank.
Well, I'm going to get into land banks in just a second, right now. You're segueing. Right now, if you wanted to do a neighborhood improvement authority, that would be local within the Village of Empire, if you wanted to do that.
So, if you're a homestead piece of property, you pay about, in Empire, around 24, 26 mils, total property taxes, all in, okay? The village portion's only 6.5, give or take. So, can this neighborhood improvement authority capture the incremental taxes over and above its own 6 mils and dip into the incremental taxes associated with the other
Yes.
20 mils?
Yes, with some some significant caveats, and here they are. With this tool, neighborhood improvement authority, the state school taxes cannot be captured, okay?
Well, there's a big chunk.
Give me a minute, hang on. And the other jurisdictions have the ability to opt out. Okay? All right? Yeah, I know that going in, okay? It's a discussion you have to have with your fellow taxing jurisdictions. Why? Because new revenue, new value that actually rises in Empire, guess what? After 11 and a half years, or whatever it is, it's going to help them too. It's going to help them too. Now, let's go to this other tool, okay? All right? Because you can see that there's benefit, but now there's some limitations to the neighborhood stuff. But let's look at this. Now, I represent a land bank, okay? The state land bank. You have a good land bank in your neck of the woods, Leland Land Bank, okay? And Benson Land Bank's pretty good too, okay? So there's a whole network of land banks out there, but some counties don't have land banks. We operate statewide, but we like to help county land banks when they ask our help to do projects and support. With Trudy and John, we've been pretty active. They're going to probably do a project with Habitat for Humanity up Maple City Way, I think, somewhere that way. We've been talking to them about that project. So it's good. But now there's this linkage that has been identified. We pioneered this about 3 years ago, which is between the Brownfield Act, and I've talked to you about cleanup of sites, and you might be familiar with the Brownfield Act, but take away the word brownfield and focus on redevelopment, okay? Because an eligible property under Act 381 is a contaminated site, a brownfield, but it can also be obsolete, blighted, or owned or controlled by a land bank. No other condition required. And that ties back to this linkage that was put together back in 2003, 2004, about 17 years ago, by the legislature. And I know because I was there, involved in those work group sessions with the legislature 17 years ago. We talked about land banking being to control these really junky properties that had title issues and stuff like that, but we actually expanded it to this idea that a land bank property owner controlled is eligible for TIF assistance no matter where it is in the state, whether you're in a big core community or whether you're out in a small little village or a small little township doing projects. If it's owned or controlled by a land bank, it's eligible, okay? So there's this linkage, and it was designed in statute for these two tools to work together. However, just like neighborhood authorities, that track record of linkage is pretty spotty. There's not a lot of knowledge and even less practice out there across the state between use of these two tools, okay? So what I described to you is that land bank properties can undertake all eligible activities. And land bank properties, because they're by definition eligible properties. So what we've been starting to do, and other few land banks are starting to do, and this will sound weird, but I want you to understand this concept, which is that a community with need for housing development or a developer who has a site that has extraordinary costs actually work with their land bank and they transfer title to that land bank on a temporary basis, which by virtue of that qualifies it for any eligible activity under Michigan law. It would include infrastructure, site preparation, the rest of the jazz that I just mentioned to you. And then the project gets approved. Both it gets planning commission entitled and it gets a TIF plan entitled. Now this is not a district. This is on a parcel, a project basis. An eligible property is a subject parcel and any contiguous property which comprises the project. Okay? So these two tools come together, have the same net effect, the couple major caveats. One is that all the taxes apply. No one can opt out. And if you want school taxes, you can make requests to the state, and they'll consider your application. And if they approve it, you're approved for taxes. So it's a similar mechanism, but it's more defined to a site within a community. And if you have a land bank which understands this and is willing to work with you, Village of Empire, or you, developer community, you've got an opportunity to put housing projects, development projects at play to cover infrastructure costs, like community septic systems, but with one little interesting twist right here. All right? The idea here is that part of the eligible activities on land bank properties is they can assist in selling or conveying properties. So what that means is that if you build a house, I'll give you simple numbers. Can't wait to see your eyes on this. Well, you've been, Chris, you've heard this already. All right? You build a house and you put it up for sale at $200,000. Don't laugh at my numbers. Just play with me here. And your market can afford $170,000 or $160,000. Okay? Well, if you concede that $30,000 to $40,000 to make a sale to that qualified household, that concession of value is an act of assistance in selling the property, which means it itself is TIF eligible for reimbursement. So I just showed you how TIF can be used to subsidize housing purchases to help meet your market demand at the price points of your market. That's the big, big discovery that was made 2 years ago, and it's starting to happen now. This map is pre-pandemic, okay? As a lot of things in life, they kind of like went in hibernation with pandemic. But at that time, back in right around the beginning of 2020, a little over a year ago, the yellow-colored municipalities and counties had been reached out to us. Most of them are land bank counties, but they were intrigued to want to think about how to do this. The areas, communities, and counties that are in orange were past intrigue, and they were thinking about how to actually formulate this. And the greenies up here were the ones that were actually active. They wanted to get going. They had some ideas to go. So this has changed a little bit since then, because some communities have kind of went, hibernated. They're still waiting to come back. But there's knowledge out there. There was just an announcement and a press release. My boss was out at Newaygo on Monday with a big press conference. They broke ground on phase 2 of Sable Homes' development out there, which is a coverage for subsidy, 16 lots of housing, which is going to reduce those house prices by $50,000 to help sell to home markets or households in the market to go. And in fact, you know what? That's it. Now that's not, they just broke ground, so that was the last phase. Okay, but they're going to do 16 more homes for that as well. And now, maybe something more tied to you guys, okay? Oakland County, or Commerce Town, excuse me, Oakland County had a big gravel quarry. Well, it's there right now, and it's not contaminated. Well, the trouble is, well, you know what gravel quarries are about, right? They have, their grades are really cool, right? They're like this, okay? How can you build on a gravel quarry? Well, it needs site preparation costs, or site preparations, and it's extraordinary. It's not, a developer's not going to go in and just be able to prep that site and build houses and sell them at market cost. It's extraordinary cost. So that transaction scenario I just described is what's happening here. That developer has temporarily titled that property to us, the State Land Bank. They're going through the brownfield process right now. They've already gotten approval for the project. It's 200 homes. When the brownfield plan gets finally approved, should be within the next month. Then after they'll start infrastructure. The infrastructure costs on this site are to the tune of about $9 million. Okay, so they're going to build out their infrastructure. They're going to borrow to finance it, and the brownfield plan, the TIF plan, is going to capture that back. And it all happens because a land bank gets together with the developer, with the municipality, and they structure it up to actually make that doable. And you have that power in your county with the Leelanau Land Bank already, because they're good. They know what this is about. And so Benzie County is just getting understanding that as well. And a few other land banks in northwest Michigan are starting to understand this too. So you have resources, tools at your disposal. We also offer funds to land banks and the local units through the land banks to actually do housing pre-development. Who knows that? Jane McKenzie knows about that. We've talked with her a few times about projects. We got one going up, where's Steve? Did Steve leave already? There's Emmett, right? Emmett County, right? Charlevoix County, I'm sorry, Charlevoix County. That project's up there as well. It's gonna be a borrow for funds. So the point being is that if you get going, whether it's infrastructure support for housing development or other means, either through Leelanau Land Bank, or if you're from a county that doesn't have a land bank, we'll help you. Okay? We already covered these few topics already, but I want to go over them again. I'm going to be clear, which is, the answer to the question is, first of all, is Act 381 the brownfield TIF like other TIFs? No. I talked about district TIFs like neighborhood authorities, but the brownfield TIF is a project or parcel based. So keep that in mind, okay? Same mechanism, two different applications, which can be advantageous based upon situation. You have a neighborhood that needs one you want to work on? Okay. You have a site you want to work on? There's a tool for you there too. And second, and boy, I'm just going to continue to politely hammer away at this, which is the concern out there that TIF takes away money is a fallacy. Why? And you got to think it through and help your electeds think this through. If that extraordinary cost isn't covered, whatever that cost is, there will never be any new revenue from that site or that neighborhood or that area of the community. And if there's never new revenue other than the simple annual increase in value, how are you going to grow to pay more for more services, let alone cover larger ticket items like expanding your municipal infrastructure? I'm going to be polite to tell you something like we heard before, which is there's a difference between readiness and doing this. I'm familiar with the RRC program and the development readiness work of the state because 10 years ago I was involved in creating it. Okay, maybe 6 years ago. I don't want to sound too old. At that time, I knew that getting communities ready for development is different than developing in communities. Because you can get as ready as you want, but if you don't take the next step to start doing, you'll be ready forever. I am strongly encouraging you to get to the doing. Because you have the power and the knowledge, and now you have some tools to help you doing it. And with that, I'm done. Do you have any questions? If you want to throw tomatoes, you can. I'm okay with that, okay? Because when I go out and talk to audiences, honestly, I want to give them information, but I'm challenging you. I'm challenging you. Get to the doing. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just trying to make sure I understand this completely. So the Maple City thing that you referred to is, I pass it every time I go out to Civilization. So, and it's going to be wonderful. So after the dollar store, after you guys beat the dollar store down here, they tried Maple City. And it was an elderly woman selling her land, was on a corner, and there's a big consumers or DTE box, like 10 foot long. What do they call those? Substation. So maybe that made it undesirable, but I think so. The woman agreed to sell it to the land bank. Is that what you implied?
I'm aware that there's a project. Unfortunately, I don't know the details of the project.
Well, I think the woman, so is this possible? I think, when you said that, I think she sold it to the land bank instead of to the dollar store.
She did.
And then, so then the land bank offered it to Habitat? Is that how it works with the land bank?
Well, land banks, I don't know the circumstance in detail, but land banks under law have the ability to acquire and dispose of property as they see fit. The only restrictions, they can't do a casino project, and they can't use eminent domain. But land banks are like real estate entities. They literally are a very powerful real estate entity put in the government's hands for productive reuse, to put properties to productive reuse, okay? So I don't know the details of the transaction.
So you can transfer in and transfer out.
Oh, yes,
So you're just helping facilitate
Generally, my response is absolutely. To this site, I don't know the details, I'm getting, but yeah, absolutely. And only recently has that been understood and now being put into practice across in a growing number of land banks across the state.
The land bank pays for the land, they're partnering with Habitat for Humanity as a developer. Habitat for Humanity develops into, I think, 6 units that will be sold to eligible home buyers.
So land
And
banks
then
still-
that land, that vacant land parcel becomes more valuable and will be paying a lot more taxes when those ultimate owners buy the homes that Habitat for Humanity built.